All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So as mentioned by Beth and Dan, I am Daniel King. I'm the Chief of Cybersecurity for CISA Region 1. Been with CISA now coming up on, God, it's almost been 9 months. Prior to that, spent 3 years with IBM Security here in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Was global lead for IBM Security Command, and that was a job working with IBM Security, X-Force, Incident Response, as well as operating their globally distributed cyber range environment, about a petabyte's worth of environment that allows us to take some of the biggest companies in the United States and put them through their paces, both hands-on keyboard and at the executive board level. So have seen this from all sides. Prior to working in the commercial sector, 30 years of active duty United States military. I was an Army officer. Last assignment was at Fort Meade. So first quiz question, go ahead and put your answers in chat. Does anybody know what organization is at Fort Meade, Maryland? Fort Meade, Maryland. Not a clue. Good. Thanks, Darcy. That actually means the organization is doing its job. Now, Air Force got some representation. Good point, Jim. Fort Meade, Maryland. By this time, you should be able to look it up if you were really on your ball. There you go. It's got an N at the beginning, an S in the middle, and an A at the end. I was actually part of that organization and also on the other side of the fence, which is known as Cyber Command. So I worked for the director. It was a privilege to work with the intelligence community, but I stayed in uniform and I was very much part of the Department of Defense, but we worked very closely with our colleagues in the intelligence community. So I've got a view on this space that may be a little pointier than many of my colleagues in cybersecurity. But it's a privilege to be here in region. I love New England. It certainly, you probably couldn't pay me to go back to DC after the past 3 years up here. But we're going to be doing some work today, and we're going to be going through Cybersecurity Awareness Month stuff, but I've tailored this for your industry. So this is the theme for this year's Cybersecurity Awareness Month. And it's see yourself in cyber. So I'm going to unpack that a little bit. But as we go through this today, one, I do want very much you to go ahead and just have a conversation with me as we go through this. But I want you to look at everything that I'm going to share with you today from your own personal perspective, but then also from the perspective of your work responsibilities in terms of what you do for the organizations that you represent, because it's going to be relevant. Now, there are varying degrees of technicality with this, and depending on how you answer some of the questions that I'm going to be answering you, I will go ahead and dial this in terms of how technical we want to get. But within your industry, within health services writ large, there is a tremendous amount of technologies that we rely upon in everything we do. And for better or worse, those technologies are in many cases interconnected with systems that weren't necessarily designed to connect to these kind of systems, but the efficiencies of our businesses have compelled us to get into this space. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, as I said, Cybersecurity Awareness Month, here's the plan. I'm going to go at this thing from the 10,000 foot level, looking down, real world current incident that's actually still ongoing, at least as I checked over the weekend as to where it was still at with a major health service provider that some of you may already know, some of you may actually work with. And we're going to unpack that. We're going to analyze what's happening, and we're going to actually discuss why this is actually something that we need to care about from the perspective of what's changed and what's changed in this space, because that is going to lead us into the next part, which is the view from 25 feet about you and how you're able to look at risk inside this space for yourself, how you can protect yourself. And these same rules will apply even to organizations. So that's kind of the easy part of this, is that I'm going to be hitting this twice, both at the organizational 10,000 foot level and then drilling down into the 25 foot level. Any questions at this point before we get rolling? Excellent, like that. Okay, so a couple boilerplate things we got to hit. Since 2020, since 2004, October is celebrated as Cybersecurity Awareness Month. Now that means a lot of different things to a lot of different organizations. When I was with the military, you basically had to go through the same hour-long presentation that you went through every single year, and to the point where it was so burned into your head that you knew all the answers. You didn't even need to watch what was going on. You just knew all the answers and you just clicked through it. That's not particularly effective. The reason being is that these technologies change so quickly. And that we don't necessarily recognize some of the risks that are in this space. But they're taking this entire month here at CISA to elevate awareness and what we can do both organizationally and in our own homes as to how we can make ourselves less risky and safer. Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency is who I currently work for, and I intend to be here for quite a while. We are the federal lead for Cybersecurity Awareness Month with our partners in the National Cybersecurity Alliance as a co-lead, and they have a current program called Stay Safe Online. So please go ahead and visit that if you feel so compelled. The 2022 campaign is Seeing Yourself in Cyber. Now, I'm not really that thrilled with that sort of bumper sticker because it really doesn't make a lot of sense to anybody, but it does kind of open the door into how the discussion is going to go throughout the course of today. So we say in this industry, people, process, and technologies. Those are the three areas where you have the ability to adjust your risk profile. In those three, people, process, technologies, process being organizational, policies, governance, things like that, technologies being what we're using right now on this call, computers and monitors and networks. What do you think is the largest portion of this three-part pie, people, process, technologies, in terms of what we can do to actually adjust to reduce risk? Go ahead and throw an answer in chat for me. Okay, got a couple answers there. Let me see if I can see that. Yep, you got it. Everybody's on board. That's exactly right. Now, as I said, I come from the pointy end of this space. Certainly cyber defense is my current focus and has been even prior to that. But from an attack surface standpoint, people are always going to be the most lucrative in terms of what actors are going to go for. We're complex in so many ways. And as we utilize these technologies inside the processes that we have been provided by our organizations, we are the greatest variable. We are the people that are in the space, and we're actually the one that have the privileges to do stuff. And so, threat actors know that. And that's always going to be the first choice. It has the highest return on hacker investment in terms of what they're trying to go after, because people are conditioned. People are conditioned to respond to certain stimulus, and we'll go into some of those today. Frankly, inside of this country, we are conditioned from cradle to grave to respond to information. That's advertising, that's marketing, it's everything around our society of commerce. And because of that, that can be exploited. So we're going to focus on that as we go through today. Again, 25,000 feet, all the way down to 10,000 feet or 25 feet. And as we go through the course of today, we're going to start with an organization that has been going through a lot of challenges over the past couple of weeks. Common Spirit, headquartered in Chicago, second largest not-for-profit healthcare system. Now, I'm not picking on them. This is actually in the press right now. I'm not going to be sharing any sensitive information that has not been publicly released. But one of the biggest clues here is that second part of that statement, second largest not-for-profit. I think everyone on this call is very aware at how closely managed the margins are for organizations like this. Yes, the mission is always to care for patients, but the ability to be able to make budget and to make ends meet inside the not-for-profit space is extremely difficult. And because of that, hard business choices have to be made, and frequently those do result in increased risk. So 142 hospitals, 1,500 facilities nationwide, 21 states, and their services are accessible in 1 of 4 Americans. Just by a raise of hand or a comment in chat, has anyone been following what's been happening to Common Spirit over the past few weeks? Just throw a thumbs up or a comment in chat that you know what's going on with them. Okay, Laura, got it? No, no. Okay, all right, we'll go ahead. Now, if we go through this and anyone's got any insight and has something they want to share, by all means, go ahead and pipe up. I'm happy to sort of explore any of the conversation we have today. So, as I said, not for profit. This is from the 3rd of October. An incident was detected within the organization. On the 4th of October, they released a statement. Inside that statement, it has very clearly, you see my quotations in there, an IT issue. And then they say, as a precautionary step, we have taken some of our systems offline. May include some electronic health record systems. And we're contacting patients to reschedule. All right. So IT issue, precautionary step, taking some systems offline, and intentionally taking it offline, may include electronic health records and contacting patients to reschedule. All right. What do you guys think is going on? This is all that came out on 4 October. Go ahead, tell me what you think in chat. Data breach, okay. More than what, there you go, Jeffrey, you're spot on, man. It's got all the hallmarks of ransomware, doesn't it? They were hacked, good, Roy. Yep. You know, there's clearly a hack. I wouldn't be talking about them if they weren't, something happened, right? But I think there are some indicators here. I mean, so as you sort of unpack this, as a precautionary step, taking systems offline, that tells me that there's something inside the system that is moving across the system. And when they say precautionary, that means that they're trying to isolate it. And that, you know, that's very clearly what they're doing. You can see that they are running some sort of an incident response. Taking some systems offline may include some EHR. Okay, now, we know the challenges with electronic health records, at least I would assume that many on this call do. So in many cases, these are not locally hosted, and I suspect at a nationwide hospital organization or national hospital organization, that these things are probably a heavily networked system. That's probably a service or a potentially a cloud service, you know, a SaaS system that allows them to go into a collection of resources to be able to gain access to them. And so by them taking some systems offline, and that there does appear to be some impact to electronic health records, that also gives me a clue as to sort of the scale of this. This isn't an isolated incident. This is something that's moving across their network and now has extended out into spaces that are perhaps provided by their service providers. And then they're also saying that there's impact to patients. So that was good. I mean, you guys were spot on. And this is the cause. I think we're going to get there because there's going to be another statement. Again, this was some weeks ago. And so back here, we're in the, looking at, there's been some sort of a data breach. Breach is an interesting term, and we'll sort of unpack this just for a moment. When I used to work with commercial clients, the legal teams would get very sensitive when you use the term breach, because breach is a legal term. Yes, breach does appear in some regulatory documents, but breach has a very specific determination within an organization. Loss of control, an incident, they get very specific about the terminology, especially inside of communications within organizations when something bad happens, because the term breach is a legal determination. When a company says that there has been a breach, it means that they have declared legally that they have reached that threshold of loss of information to unauthorized personnel. Be careful with that term, especially inside of emails and with other types of communications within your organization, because if something were to happen in your organization on that first day, you guys are firing off communications inside of your organizations that I think we've been breached, something happened, we've been hacked. That term breached, as it goes, if this ends up going to court, that first message, breach, is an indication that your organization was aware of the scope and scale of what had happened. And so I see a lot of companies trying to put some discipline, some rigor back into the organization to try to get that word taken out of communications, at least in the initial phases, until the incident response team and the legal team have had a time to determine what exactly is happening. So we're speculating wholly here. We're totally speculating on what we think is going on with Common Spirit at this point. Here we are, 2 weeks later, October 17th. We're managing a response to a cyber attack. It is ransomware. Patient care is our utmost priority. Continuing to investigate and evaluate if there are impacts to patient data. 4 care groups and clinic groups are unaffected. They're all in Virginia, actually. So it's 21 states, and the ones that they hold up as unaffected is 1 in 1 state. Providers are unable to access records, and we are working diligently. Okay. Again, if you have any thoughts at this point, go ahead and throw them into chat. I'm going to start to unpack this second statement here a bit more. Okay, managing response to a cyber attack. The company is acknowledging that an outside party has attacked them. They're characterizing themselves as a victim. Legally, that's absolutely fine, and I absolutely recognize that, but they are characterizing the nature of what's happened as this is not an internal misfire. This is something that's happened from outside the organization. It's ransomware. Patient care is our utmost priority. Why do you think they would put that in the second statement? Anybody have any thoughts? Go ahead and throw it in chat if you do. Got a couple in here. Okay, liability, Jim, good thinking. Create a sense of calm, good, Will, yeah. They want to cover liability. Okay, fair enough. I think you're on the right track. I mean, to say that in the second sort of announcement, I would have actually probably led with that one, and just me personally, because that I'm a hospital. That is always my utmost priority, always. I mean, if I'm not doing that, I'm not doing a very good job as being a hospital. So they're now putting priorities into this thing, and patient care should always be the #1 priority. And from a business versus a hospital perspective, I mean, that's an interesting sort of dynamic to get into at 2 weeks into this. Makes me kind of think how much impact there really is. Continuing to investigate and evaluate if there are impacts to patient data. You've had 2 weeks to look at this. That kind of makes me think that there may not be as far into the incident response as I would hope they would be at 2 weeks. If they're, well, nevertheless, that's the statement they made. I also mentioned the fact that 4 care groups, all of which being in Virginia, are unaffected. That's great news, but it also makes me concerned about what about the other states and what about the other clinics and how much impact is there? And they're flat out saying that the providers do not have access to records. So at that point, I'm sort of wondering, okay, how are they continuing to operate if they don't have access to patient records? That last bit about working diligently, yeah, I'm sure they are. I'm sure that very little sleep has been had by the incident response team. And I'm sure very little sleep has been had by the clinicians as they're trying to get to another place where they're not able to access those systems. So, back to see yourself in cyber. Put yourself in this position if you would. What do you think the hospital is doing right now? Okay, panicking, Jim, yeah. I mean, think about your organization, and certainly don't need to go into any information that you don't feel comfortable with sharing about. What would be your processes if you lost access to electronic health records for an extended period? 2 weeks now. And again, I did check on this just recently. Oh yeah, Bill, yeah, spot on, the best they can. How would you go about doing that? Yeah, hard copy. So the question really becomes a record room. What's the process to be able to actually switch back to an analog mechanical process? Paper, good, backup. Okay, Darcy, that's a great point. I'm going to come back to it after we see a couple more of these. Do they have backup? Yeah, Laura, that's a great point. Okay, so let's look at this. If in the second comment they're saying we're continuing to investigate and evaluate impacts to patient data, that tells me that they have not been able to eradicate the process that is causing the damage. They haven't been able to contain this yet. And so as much as I would like to say that the IR plan gets to this point, okay, we get or throw out the actor, reestablish the environment, contain it, eradicate it, get it stood up, and then install the backups. That is a contingency response plan. That's an IR plan. But what happens when you can't get to that point? So if you're not going to be able to restore the electronic services that you're relying on, do you have an analog plan? Ooh, Jim, spot on. Yeah, there you go. So I guarantee, I don't know. We're entirely speculating here. Yeah, there's probably some pretty heavy conversations going on right now. Because this is the challenge that we get into with ransomware. Quiz question. Yay. Ransomware is extortion, simple and pure. That's what ransomware is, but it's holding at risk a system that is of value to an organization or an individual. When do you think the first case of extortion was tried in a Western courtroom? Just take a guess. Pick a number. 1800s, good. Keep going. 1994, okay. Okay, that may be ransomware. Keep going back, Bill. You can tack on another 200 years on that one. There you go, Roy. Spot on, man. 1550. You may have seen me speak before. 1550. Yeah, 1550. The first trial was in a UK courtroom. So here's my point. Extortion is an established criminal business enterprise. We're dealing with it today in ransomware, which is it's benefited from advances in technology. This is encryption and it's extortion. And that, unfortunately, I'm going to say this, that from a criminal enterprise perspective, that's a pretty effective transition into bringing it into the information age. I'm not going to say it's a successful business model, but it sure kind of looks like one. So yeah, this is a problem, especially because threat actors have done the due diligence. They have done the analysis on the organizations that they attack, and they know what's precious, and they know what they have to do in order to try to get to that point that Jim just mentioned, which is to pay the ransom. Now, certainly, CISA, we never recommend paying the ransom. Law enforcement will always tell you, not to pay the ransom, because it facilitates that criminal enterprise. It facilitates that business model. On the other hand, I would also tell you, as a former military officer and someone who worked for the intelligence community, that if you pinpoint a pain point for a victim to a point where they really don't feel like they have any other option, they're going to capitulate. And unfortunately, that's kind of the place we're at right now. They're that good. All right, so let's continue with this, because I think this is relevant to the conversation we're having. I do want to sort of take this back as to what do we think they're doing right now, because they're a hospital, they're a massive hospital chain, second largest. They have to continue to operate. So let's see where we end up with this. All right, so I'm going to put a question to you. If containment and eradication and restoration, you can't even get to the point of putting in backups, are variable, what are those sort of critical points that we should be focused on? Because we've made assumptions. We've made assumptions in our planning. And whether you're looking at this from an IT perspective or from a business perspective, you have to make risk-informed decisions every single day. But I think that we're in a place now where the line is moving a bit. And I don't mean just a little. So I'm going to deviate a little bit from the slides here, because I do want to share something with you. For about the past 25 years, incidents that have taken place inside of cyberspace, whether they be malicious or accidental, for the most part, have been largely confined to the realm of disruptive. The internet has proven incredibly resilient. And when I say the internet, I mean the public network that we call the internet. And it's a public network, and that'll come up sort of in the later half of this conversation. It's taken some massive hits. 9/11, one of the major nodes that was required for the transmission of the internet was sitting literally at the World Trade Center and had a building dropped on it. Yes, the global internet was impacted to a degree of about a 10% of the internet in terms of bandwidth was impacted by a building being dropped on a major node. It's incredibly resilient. Think about what it's meant from COVID. I mean, especially, I mean, acutely within this industry that you represent. No question, the heroes of the past 3 years as we've navigated the consequences of a global pandemic are our first responders, our medical professionals, and all of you in this space. You have helped us all to navigate I would say unprecedented, unfortunately it's not unprecedented, but certainly in our lifetimes, an unprecedented risk to our health. But I would tell you that on the corollary to that, the most valuable player on the other side of that was the internet, because it enabled us to be able to continue to operate our businesses remotely. And yeah, their numbers are coming in now that, scores for students are way down because of the impact of remote learning. And certainly businesses are struggling at this point to try to put the genie back in the bottle about returning to work. And yes, I am in the office today. But I mean, if you had done this 15 years earlier, when SARS happened, the resiliency wouldn't have been there. The scope of these systems would not have been there. The ability of us to literally shift from corporate-owned infrastructure into publicly accessible infrastructure in order to get to our corporate networks, it wasn't there. So it was spectacular that we were able to rely on this technology to help us continue to stay viable as a nation economically. Yes, there were hits, no question, but still, it's remarkable. The challenge is that didn't stop. And those advances in this space have continued, in some cases exponentially. And so when we look back at how our incident response plans are framed, the challenge is that these incident response plans are built on assumptions, like all business plans are, but they're built on assumptions that are assuming that you can be successful in those first three categories or not first, is about the last portion of the categories: containment, eradication, restoration. If you can't contain the actor, and they will, 50% of the time the actor will come back, statistically. If you can't expel them and can't keep them out, can't eradicate the vulnerability from being exploited and eradicate the actor, the unauthorized actor, from your environment, you never get to restoration. These are variables. So let's take a look at some of the considerations. So what is maximum allowable downtime? Does anybody know what that is? If you've worked with disaster recovery or business continuity, you know what that means. Anybody out there have an idea what those words mean? Maximum allowable downtime. What do you think it means? Pretty self-explanatory.
Hey, Dan, while we're waiting for people to write in on that, we did have one question come in about how do you trust your system and your data?
That's a huge question. And I could probably spend a couple hours talking about that. Integrity is what you're talking about. So within cybersecurity, and again, these are what we call the pillars of the triad. The pillars are made up of a triad. All three things are important. If you're in the IT space, you're in the cybersecurity space, you'll know what I'm talking about. And there are three. There's confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And those three things all have, they all work in concert with one another in order to get at what the question is asking. How do you trust your environment? Integrity is the confidence that the data within your systems and that your systems themselves have been unchanged. Confidentiality, obviously, is that those who are not authorized to get access to the information can't get access to the information. It's principally encryption, but it's also authentication. And then the last one about availability really speaks to what business is about, because these networks and what I was speaking to a moment ago with regard to the internet, the availability of the service has become ubiquitous. We just assume that these things are here with us, and that the ability to be able to reach to it is always there. That's kind of incredible. I mean, you know, I've got what, 3 phones on my desk right now that are all reliant entirely on the ability to reach into the internet. I've got a computer on my desk that reach to the internet. All of this is based on availability. But when we come back to integrity, that's really the hard thing. Trust inside your network is architected in terms of how your people, processes, and technologies all work together, because it is variable over time. It changes depending on conditions inside the network environment, and your ability as a defender or as an operator is based on the idea that you're able to look at the network and say, okay, everything's operating the way it is. It's supposed to. That's not the case. I've worked on networks that have been probed or scanned tens of millions of times a day for weaknesses a day, because these things are happening at scale, and they're looking for chinks in the armor. They're looking for gaps and seams and oversights, and every single day another vulnerability comes out. We'll talk about one that was just released today in a couple minutes. But nevertheless, that really is the core question. How do you trust your environment? And we can get into conversations about, you know, zero trust, but I also want to sort of keep it away from the marketing terminology. So let me go through a couple more of these here. Maximum allowable downtime. That's exactly right. Amy, I see yours is right. Roy, you're spot on. Okay, maximum time before loss of business or loss of faith in business. Spot on. So that is not variable. There is an actual time where that service has been unavailable for so long that the business is now no longer viable. And unfortunately, I have worked on incident responses where the business had reached that point and they were unable to continue to operate. That's happening with increasing frequency. So that's what I mean by changes in the space. Whereas 20 years ago, 15 years ago, I would be able to say with confidence that most of the disruption or most of the things that happen inside the space were disruptive in nature. Unfortunately, and this is a truism, it's happening more frequently, we're moving into the destructive space. And we're moving into a place where it is possible to make a system completely and entirely unrecoverable. That's sobering, because that also crosses some lines that we usually don't attribute to things in cyberspace, that you can actually make something that you just can't go out and buy another piece of equipment and bring it back up. Actors get in and they compromise backup systems. They get in and they invalidate the integrity of a backup, and they may sit inside that system for months at a time, much longer than the retention period of the actual backups. And because they've been sitting in there and they've compromised the system so deeply that it cannot be recovered using the processes that the company had established. I also know of one instance where a company had been compromised so deeply that every time they tried to initialize a restoration process, they had lost control of systems at such a deep level that there were self-destruct processes in place. Every time they tried to even start to introduce new code into the environment, the system would kill it. Unfortunately, in that system, that is one of those companies that hit that maximum allowable downtime, and they failed. The system literally had to be burned to the ground and started over from scratch, to an incredible cost to the company. So again, I'm not trying to sow fear, uncertainty, and doubt here. I'm just saying that this environment is changing and changing dramatically. So the next question is where I sort of want to get to with our conversation about the company that we've been talking about previously. What is the local and regional capacity to absorb patient offload? Because patient care is our first priority. So I'm certain of this, and I certainly have worked with your colleagues and partners across different states here in New England, that is part of an integrated contingency operation, contingency plan, that when one hospital is impacted by something, that they're able to communicate with other regional hospitals to be able to offload patients after triage of being able to identify which ones are the most priority for care, but it's suboptimal process because you've got transportation time in there, you've got to do the triage time, there, you know, the clock's turning on this thing. There is a path, but it's not ideal. We also get to this question, and this one is really the other part to this thing. If we're using software as a service or services that are essentially cloud-based, what's the likelihood that our partners locally and regionally are not also using those same systems? And I think we've seen that where we've actually had outages of some of these service providers that have caused wide scale impact. And in most cases, thankfully, it's largely a technical glitch that causes the outage. But for a period of time, I mean, you know, just like we kind of saw that COVID was a possibility, you know, 15 years earlier with what was going on with SARS, if it can be done accidentally, it can be done intentionally. And so this kind of leads me to my last question for this slide. And, you know, I'm going to ask this to you all, and please offer, you know, provide me what your thoughts are. When you look at your business continuity or disaster recovery plans, do you think that they were designed to address the worst case or the most likely case? Yeah, Jim. Does anybody know why we would focus on most likely? This is not a criticism, by the way. This is just reality. Why? Okay, Bill, that's a good point. There's something that we can imagine would happen. Any other reason? There you go. Thank you, Will. Spot on. Cost. It's business. Sorry. I've worked in this space before. You can't have everything. This is business. The profit matters. All right. And even if you're not for profit, making cost matters. HVA dictates. Very good. Very good point. All right. So here's my point with this specific comment. I'm not advocating for us to go out and start building plans based off of meteor strikes. Yes, one happened a really long time ago. Will one happen again? I don't know, maybe, might, who knows? But building a plan based off of something that's that extraordinary probability, gotta knock on wood, we don't have one. But a meteor strike is, you know, highly improbable. And yet, you know, the other point to that is if there was something at that scope and scale, it's probably not going to be a big concern if we're at ground zero for something like that. Yes, personally it would be, but in terms of whether my business can continue to operate at that scale, I'm probably, if I counting my blessings, if I was somewhere on the other side of the planet, because you might have a chance. So we can't address every possible contingency. But my point is that we do have to stay plugged into what's happening around us. And that's kind of where we're going to go next. All right. As a business, and you know, some of you may have access to the folks on your teams who build these plans. Some of you may just be around them and know where the plans are. This is a conversation that I am advocating as part of Cybersecurity Awareness Month, and that is we need to go back and look at the assumptions we made. We need to look at the assumptions that we made about whether or not the disaster recovery and business continuity plans are tuned to what is going on around us now. I would tell you there's a very high probability that anything in cyber is not included in that plan because they're based off of things, as was already raised, things that they've seen. And in most cases, what we're most frequently exposed to is natural disasters. But those assumptions, unfortunately, aren't necessarily carried over into cyber. So disaster recovery and contingency plans, and I've seen a couple of different measurements on this thing. In only about 10% of cases actually are built to address anything other than natural events. And what I mean by that is human caused events is the other category for this thing. Previously, human caused events would be limited to things like terrorism. and you could probably make the argument that we're kind of in a similar space here, but the problem is the ease by which these things can be imparted. Terrorism requires a lot of planning and a lot of access to resources. It requires people on the ground, all sorts of stuff that cyber really doesn't have in terms of a cost overhead. Cyber is not or hasn't previously been included in a lot of contingency plans. Yes, we have incident response plans. Absolutely. We've got playbooks. We run them. We train them. We know where they are. In many cases, these playbooks get run multiple times a day. We're looking at a company that obviously has an incident response plan that has been, frankly, overcome. And now they're in that condition of contingency. Now they're looking at potentially business continuity. That's what I mean by the variables are changing. These risks will change and they will continue to change. And the space is defined by change. And when we get into the 25-foot view, I think you'll see pretty clearly what I mean by that. Okay. I want you to look at cyber differently. And when I say cyber, what I mean is information technology. I am dating myself considerably by saying this, but I can remember a time before the internet. And I remember a time before cell phones. And the speed at which these technologies have been adopted is spectacular. I mean, literally vertical in terms of how quickly our societies have adopted and embraced these technologies. Much faster than almost everything that had every previous technology that has reached commercial space. Nothing comes as close and as fast as what we've seen in these spaces. And I mean by that verticality in terms of from nobody having it to everybody having it. Not televisions, not cars, not washing machines, none of the other technologies out there that we consider to be ubiquitous yet even come close to mapping how quickly we've gotten into this space. COVID accelerated this process. And by saying that, it has become a dependency. And when I say by dependency, I mean like electricity and water and gas lines. Global transportation networks. It is a dependency. Economies are built off of these technologies, and it scales. I ask you this: think about one thing that your organization does that is not in some way, shape, or form reliant on information technologies in order to operate. That wasn't the intention. That was an efficiency that was capable because of the technologies that made it interesting for us to try to move it into the space. And that's how quickly it's happened. Medical imaging. We've had medical imaging for a very long time, but when these things started to become networked and all this data started moving back and forth, and some of the nature of the information inside of medical imaging and some of the things that are embedded inside of medical images and all the things that go along with it, well, we've tried to reduce risk by putting regulations around them and having supervision as to what our requirements are for handling the information. But frankly, the technology is moving so quickly, to say that you're actually meeting regulatory requirements, that's not sufficient to be able to say that you have trust in your systems. It's a big variable. The other challenge to this thing is that the markets are not a reliable means to be able to check the risk. And that's just the nature of our societies and how we operate. I mean, if it's on the marketplace, people can vote with their dollars. They vote with what their purchase behaviors are. Unfortunately, these things are really complex. And there may be risks inside this space that are not necessarily perceivable at the coalface, that you literally can see what the problem with this is. And we're connecting stuff that probably, I do a lot of work with industrial control systems. I do a lot of stuff with operational technologies. And I can't tell you how many times I scratch my head going, that really shouldn't be connected to the internet. And yet, here we are. Information technologies are now ubiquitous, meaning that they're all around us. Even in spaces that are sensitive, I have to, go through a virtual pat down to make sure that I don't have some kind of information technology on me that is going to present a risk inside the spaces I operate in. Take off my watch. My watch needs to be internet connected. Sorry. I mean, it's time. It doesn't necessarily need the internet to tell me what that is. Nevertheless, it's all around us. Complexity walls. I don't know if any of you have hit this one before. This is a concept that has bumped up of interest in literally the past couple of weeks, but it's a concept that is, I mean, it was intuitive up to this point. This is coming from a study that just came out about a week ago from OneCloud. And what it's saying is that 81% of companies have issued instructions from the board down through the companies to cease and desist all new cloud acquisitions and cloud purchases or cloud services that are being introduced into the environment because of cost. Now, I could have told you that early on. I worked with cloud for a very long time, and that meter spins quickly. And it's very difficult to be able to recognize what costs you're incurring by using cloud, just because, yes, it looks like a great business proposition to be able to say, you know what, we're going to outsource all of our IT. Somebody else is going to operate the systems. We're just going to go ahead and use it as we need it. And that's a pretty hard to measure, or at least be predictive as to how much you're going to need. And so, again, this study came out saying 81% of companies have said, okay, stop growing, stop using it, minimize. And that's a very quick pivot. Usually when I see studies of that, I sort of look at who commissioned the study, who actually did the research. Was there an agenda here? Look at it scrupulously. Again, this will come up later. Being a scrupulous consumer of information. And frankly, it looks pretty clean. This looks like a pretty good research study as to something happening in the space. And the principal reason is that companies are recognizing that they made decisions at the operational and strategic level to go into these spaces and make these kind of dependencies on technologies and services that weren't necessarily particularly transparent in terms of what the costs were. They couldn't imagine what the costs were because they couldn't see them. And that same complexity wall problem exists around these technologies today. Multi-cloud environments have multi-cloud costs. Systems complexity makes it really difficult to be able to perceive risk. Complex service dependencies are the same thing, where we have offloaded or outsourced requirements to service providers that were really important. And we look like we could do it and actually save some money by doing it, but the consequences of actually going sort of all in is kind of like what that hospital is dealing with right now. They made some decisions about some technology decisions that are actually now impacting the purpose of their organization, which is to care for people. So I'm going to pause there for a minute and get any thoughts or comments in chat. It's pretty heavy. Hey, this is not your typical Cybersecurity Awareness Month briefing. Any thoughts? Any comments?
Dan, we did have a question from a little earlier. Someone was asking about ransomware, and if you pay the ransomware and receive your data, how often is it data you can trust? I'd be worried the patient's data is changed. For example, the patient's name belonging to someone else's record.
Yeah, and this is, we've certainly seen criminal, criminal enterprises that have attempted to make it look like they operate as legitimate businesses and that they actually have some sort of assurance that if you pay, you will get a encryption key that will unlock your data. Nice try, but you're a criminal. You're already kind of committed to breaking the law before we get. I have no faith and trust that you are going to be good to your word. And we do see that. We all see things in here in double extortion, which is the actor will go into the environment, and I'll be doing another one of these presentations later in the week of a scenario of double extortion, where they will steal information from the environment, and then as they leave the environment, they're out the back door, they're going to throw ransomware in the environment. And that's the first level of extortion. When you then start collaborating with them and start working with them, or choose not to, they will either start to ratchet up the pressure on you by starting to release some of that information, or if you collaborate and cooperate with them and you pay the ransom and they send you an encryption key and everything's happy, and they will come back for a second bite of the apple through the extortion of what they've stolen from you. Again, these are criminals. there is no expectation that they are going to be anything even remotely approaching legitimate. You will see some stories of criminal enterprises out on the what's called dark web, which is the non-indexed web where a lot of these criminal actors conduct their business, of them, running things like customer feedback for ransomware for hire, where they want to try to crowdsource, endorsements from fellow criminals who have used their service and found them to be excellent. Yes, 4 stars for ransomware. I'm sorry, they're crooks. There's no guarantee at all. And my colleagues at FBI and Secret Service will tell you exactly the same thing. Now, if you are determined to have this conversation about paying, I would tell you that as much as, from CISA standpoint, I will tell you, you never pay ransom. I would have a conversation with your insurance company. And that's probably the best advice I can give you. Okay, so, all right, does not look like there is any thoughts. Okay, I'm going to assume, because nobody said anything about what I shared with you in terms of how this environment is changing, that there aren't any really hard stops about what I'm saying is way off. I can back it up, but if anybody's got any points or any issues that they'd like to raise, by all means, raise them. I'm using some fairly fresh information that I'm sharing with you about the changes in this space. But if anything, the takeaway from this specific portion is to go back and see if you can have a conversation within your organization about what assumptions did we make when we built our business continuity plans. Were they principally based on the annual, semi-annual nor'easter that comes through and takes out power to certain locations around a region? Were they based off of potentially terrorist activities? Did we look at cyber in this space? Because it's changing, and it's changing quickly. This is just one example, just specific to healthcare. There's certainly myriad examples I could give you out in the commercial space on this happening in a number of different locations. So again, it's the evolution from disruptive at scale to destructive, and that undercutting the ability for the organization to actually recover. All right, as I said, review our assumptions. Start with the big picture. What's changed? What are the assumptions we built our plans are? What risks and dependencies have changed? Now, I can't even tell you. I would have to be in your shoes to be able to say, these are our dependencies. These are the things that we absolutely have to do. These are our critical services. And we've gone into partnership with some of our third-party providers to actually make those critical services happen. Okay, did we look at what risk we onboarded with making that decision? I mean, our partners have partners, and what are their conditions that they hold their partners to inside that space? Are we potentially vulnerable to a risk that our third-party provider has in their space, but they haven't shared with us? And that has happened, unfortunately, many times when I was with IBM, where we would get contacted by somebody who had a SLA, a service level agreement with a partner, and something happened with the partner. And unfortunately, it impacted the actual company that we were working with. Rui, I think you have a question. We start with hello, Daniel. Yes, ma'am. Sir, what can I do for you? Still writing. I'll continue on. Let me come back. We'll see if we have an actual question here. Okay. There is a solution here. There is a path. And it's one that I think will resonate with you as health service professionals, because this is kind of the nature of what it is you do as your business, your what you do to serve your communities. The focus on resiliency, yes, it's a buzzword. Yes, it's all over the place. But what I mean by resiliency is literally to be able to take a hit and continue operating. So building in the ability to take a hit. It's sort of a fundamental definition of a battleship. I mean, they are built to get in and mix it up, and they are built to be hit and continue to fight. That is a very analog approach, but there's some value in going at something like that. You know, all the wonderful cars we have today with all these fantastic technologies, and it's constantly in the shop because it's too complicated. It's not being a car anymore. It's a computer with wheels. Three, I am going to come back at that one. That's a great question. So let me finish this little dialogue here, and I want to come back and I want to hit what your question is, okay? Or your comment. What risk and dependencies have changed, and have we factored in persistent disruption? Okay, so I talked about destruction, but we have this finite line, which is maximum allowable downtime. Brief anecdote, commercial client, incident response, the actor had gotten into the environment, had deep access, multiple unauthorized accounts that the organization couldn't see. Every time it ran through his run books, it would get to the point of, it would go through probably about they would go through about a 5-day period of containment and eradication. And when they got to the moment of restoration, the actor would pop back up and undermine the integrity of the environment again. And so they have to start over. And they did this 3 times. So they're now 3 weeks into this, 2.5 weeks into it. Again, that maximum allowable downtime doesn't change. That's a hard line. And so even though they're making progress, every time they get to this point, it gets reset. So that's having the same effect as destruction. You can't get to that point where you can restore. So persistent disruption is unfortunately a thing. In most cases, we'll see that plans are built on episodic disruption. Nor'easter comes through. Yep, see it coming. It's coming in. Everyone goes home for a couple of days. Power gets lost. Might have some problems with some water handling. Eventually, the storm will move off, and it'll take us a couple of days. Hopefully there's a weekend in there. We'll be able to recover. We'll get back at it. Family's safe. Home's safe. Schools are reopened. We're back at work. That's episodic. Yes, there are points in between that where it gets bad and it might get worse, but it has a finite, bounded approach. Persistent disruption is different. I would also tell you there's a corollary here in supply chain, and you're hearing about this all the time. We're living it right now. We're in a disrupted environment right now with supply chain, and we're going to continue to be there. And whether it's chips, whether it's battery technologies, whether it's baby food, the supply chain is not nearly as resilient as we thought it was. And it's principally because it's commercial. People have to be able to make money in order to stay solvent. And as things have changed, yes, some of it's due to COVID, but some of it's also due to bad business decisions. That it just comes down to it, that the supply chain, this idea of just-in-time supply, may not be as resilient as we thought it would be, especially inside of an environment that is persistently disrupted. It's a thought. Focus on resiliency. Complexity will continue to increase. That's actually one of the laws of thermodynamics. It has to do with entropy. It will always be more complex. In terms of your planning, try to focus on simplification, delivery of critical service despite disruption, the ability to take a hit, keep operating. And if you want to see some companies and some organizations that have done it, I have them listed there. Yes, NHS, in response to WannaCry, as the Brits say, it was a dog's breakfast. It was an absolute disaster for them, and yet they continued to operate. We can even talk about why. Maersk, hit but not petya, a wiper, took out every server they had in the company, except for one that had been artificially isolated because of a power outage in a country in Africa. And from that one server, they were able to restore their entire environment very rapidly. Maersk is the largest logistics firm on the planet, hit by an incident in cyber that took them to their knees. FedEx, same thing. FedEx deals with disruption every single day. They are a resilient company. Yeah, and they have had incidents that have taken them offline, but there's a very interesting business model which goes around FedEx, which is fascinating if you're interested in that. And then finally, a company you probably never heard of, which was Norsk Hydro, largest aluminum manufacturer in Europe, It's a Scandinavian company. For those of you who've ever worked in Scandinavia, you'll know how much they value transparency in those cultures. They literally broadcast their entire recovery of a ransomware incident. And it's fascinating to see what the impact was. Only company I know of that when they were impacted by ransomware, publicly held company, their stock did not go down, it went up. Because, and again, correlation is not causation. You could say that they were actually being so transparent about what they were doing and what the likelihood of their company being able to recover instilled confidence in what they were able to do. And actually people started saying, hey, they're really doing it right. All right, so I'm going to pause there and I want to go back to the question that we had earlier from Rui. What about culture? There are environments that may want to change betterment in cyber posture, but the culture lags further behind than technology. Yes, and that seems to be a challenge sometimes. Exactly right. So we have a saying inside of cybersecurity, and I've been saying it for years, that culture runs circles around security policy. And it's true. I've worked with organizations that have a very strong cybersecurity culture. Yes, those are companies that have in most cases been significantly impacted because of this, and they have made this a cultural choice. The question that I would come back to you with, Rui, is you're absolutely right. I mean, culture is the challenge here because, it's also how we define ourselves as a healthcare organization. Well, we're a hospital. Yes, you're a hospital. We take care of patients. Yes, you take care of patients. But I would also argue with you that you have all the network infrastructure of a major corporation. You're also an IT company, whether you like it or not. You may not be selling IT, but you're wholly reliant on the technology. So I'm going to put a question back to you, Rui, which is this. If we were going to approach changing culture, where would we start? If you're still with us, where do you start changing culture? Nice. Boom. Right out of the gate. Good job. You're absolutely right. Yep. Top, at the top. Yep. So, I mean, this is really the point. And we're seeing this more and more. I can give you, here's an anecdote, give you one. When I worked with IBM and I would work with the customers, and sometimes I would do events where I would have customers, CISOs and CIOs from different companies coming in for events. And one of the questions I would ask, in addition to the one about namely the one thing that you use in your company that's not wholly reliant on cyber, was this: how many of you brief your board of directors? And when I first started in IBM about 2018, that answer was about 10%, or about, I had a room full of about 60 people, about 6 would raise their hand. By the time I left in late 2020, I would tell you about 60%. That's huge to have that quick a change in terms of access to the board for the specific focus area. That literally these CISOs and CISO, Chief Information Security Officer, and CIOs are briefing the board routinely, sometimes semi-annually, sometimes quarterly, because boards are starting to recognize that this is risk. And that's what boards do. Boards deal with risk, same at senior executive level. So in order to adjust culture, we do have to look at that high level. And through the remainder of this conversation today, we're going to be focusing on yourselves, because I'm here to tell you we can't wait for the board. We're going to have to also take care of ourselves first. So to close out this little portion here, this major portion, if you have questions, yes, it is a government website. And I completely acknowledge the fact that government websites are fantastic if you're having sleep problems, because it's a great way to help overcome sleep problems. But there's some stuff in this CISA website that's actually really current and really good. Shields Up is one of the sites that we operate, which has been going since February, March. I guess end of January, geopolitical events. But Shields Up gets updated literally multiple times a day in terms of risks in this space. But take time to go out and take some time with risk and sign up for some of these services we provide. Sign up for certainly some of the alerts we provide. And at the conclusion of this, before I drop this PowerPoint, I'm going to share with you specifically health services risk that just got released an hour ago about a threat group and with ransomware that's operating in this space. And I'm going to point you to where you can find it and what it is. I see another question in chat. All right, cool. We're going to continue and we're going to sort of move into an interesting space here about you, because that's really the easiest place to start. And when I say you, I'm also talking about your families, talking about your loved ones, talking about your parents. My mother, she is my barometer. If I can get my mom to do something in this space, I'm doing it right, because she is about as resistant as anybody. Because convenience is really important to her. I think we all have parents like that. And convenience is really a powerful marketing tool when going at a certain segment of people. And I'm trying to help her recognize risk. So the way we start this is sort of asking about what you depend on. Now, certainly our loved ones, we all depend on, but what I'm talking about is more infrastructure. Kind of see the slides to the left, things that we are absolutely dependent on in terms of being able to do things that we need to get done. Energy, water, shelter, transportation. That's been the case. That goes back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs: food, shelter, clothing. It's all in there, right? We've known that for decades, years, centuries. We know that that's exactly what we need to focus on. Connectivity. That's a new one. I changed my phone about, I guess almost about 6 months ago now. Changed my phone number, which is something that we used to do all the time. And I don't care how old you are. You used to change phone numbers every time you moved. Changing a phone number these days is really a pain. One of my phone numbers got compromised when I was overseas doing some stuff for IBM. And so I came back and I was sick of it. So I just go ahead, I'm going to kill that. I'm going to kill that number. I'm going to go pick up something locally. And got to tell people I care about that I changed my phone, right? Told my parents, told my mom, told my dad, certainly people I stay in touch with. And then I started having to change the accounts because, wow, I've got a lot of services. Some things I care about, some things I don't care about that are using that number to validate my identity. That's changed. It took a good part of 3 weeks. To really update. And I still would find an account that I missed, things that some subscription somewhere I hadn't picked up on. And I was trying to do multi-factor, and this has got the old number. Connectivity has become a dependency. I mean, get to your bank account without using your phone or a computer. When was the last time you actually went to your bank? So question we start with is, what services do you depend on? And that kind of starts to give you a perspective about where you need to be sort of focusing on where you want to protect yourself. Okay. Quiet, persistent change. That's the best way I can explain it. As I said, I was dating myself earlier. Internet access. Remember that the internet is a public network. And I want to emphasize that, public network. There are things that you will do when you are driving in your own car that you will not do on public transportation. Tell me I'm wrong. That's just because it's the nature of public services. The internet is a public service. Yes, you pay for it, just like you do taking the train or the bus. And you have expectations, but it's not a private network. And you need to start thinking about it like that. I mean, you step out of your house to get on a public train to go to work, you're kind of at an elevated level of awareness, kind of looking at it, kind of looking at that person was here last week, or that person wasn't here last week, or that person is staring at me. There's something weird. I don't feel right. You're paying attention. That's called situational awareness. I'm not saying that you have to do it with everything, but I am saying that we do have to look at the internet for what it is. It is a public network. Wireless technologies. Don't get me wrong. I absolutely enjoy all the convenience that wireless technologies bring to us. Yes, I have put the technologies in my home. There is not a wireless thermostat in my bedroom. There are some things that don't need to have microphones. I'm sorry. Yes, I do come from a place there, the pointy end of cyber. Yes, you can say that I'm exaggerating the risk. You can guess, I will fess up. Yes, but I also know what I can do with it. And I also know what I can do in this space and that others can do it. Wireless technologies extend to almost every corner of our homes. And is very convenient. It also raises some questions, because do you think the wireless technology stop at the wall to your house or your apartment? Go ahead and do a speed check on what your internet looks like 15 feet outside your front door. Because I would guarantee you that you get a pretty strong signal depending on what kind of system you have at the house, and extending well beyond the boundaries of your property line. There are certainly websites I can go to where I can look at just people driving around, scooping up information, sniffing data from what routers are communicating as people drive around. Cars, telephones, houses. I mean, you can drill into anything. I did this to one of my bosses at IBM. Got to within 5 feet of the physical location of his home network router at his address. I didn't know either when I first started to play with it to show him what I could do. Found his home address, found the router, found the name of the router that he's using at the house, and told him what room it was in inside of his house, using cross-referencing with Zillow to get a floor plan for where he is. Yeah, this is one of my executives at IBM. Identity. This is also a big change. And again, I'm dating myself. Your identity, when I was younger, was basically only provided by your driver's license and your social security number. Yeah, that was a terrible idea to start using social security numbers as a means of identity, but our governments did it. And they recognized the problems with doing that. And we, unfortunately are still challenged by it. But identity has gotten to be a really broad space. I mean, I'm carrying around all sorts of badges and keys and cards, and my wallet's got all these different types of technologies that are on me right now. In many cases are absolutely reliant on the physical control of the piece of technology and the fact that there is an identity ascribed to it. Our accounts have become our identity. That's different. That's changed too. Protecting your identity is very difficult, especially if you're not taking advantage of all of the security technology, security policies that are available to protect your identity. Digital services, we already talked about it. They have become everything. Payments, access to information. You don't have to go to a library anymore. Library's in my pocket. I can get it, anything I need. When was the last time you picked up a physical map to figure out where you were going? I travel quite a bit. I am, certainly from my time in the military, I'm very confident with a map. Give me a compass, I don't even need a map. Figure out where I am, that's fine. Everybody's not like that. If you tell someone to go someplace they haven't been before without using their phone or GPS, I don't even think you can buy a map anymore for a lot of places to a degree of specificity. These things are changing quietly. And then finally, the last part of this is convergent dependencies. There are dependencies that have emerged from the space that were not intended to be designed that way, but because of convenience, decisions were made and all of a sudden things are connected. So I'll give you an example. Telephones used to be independent, was called PTS or well, it's basically an old telephone system we used to call it a plain dumb telephone system, but it was basically on an independent set of network of wires, distributed much the same way the electricity was to your homes. These companies have, I mean, trying to find a copper wire telephone system. There are still some in existence in the United States. I know where most of them are because they're incredibly resilient systems, but they're also expensive. But most telephones have switched over to internet backbone. You may have a line leading from your house, but it's going to get to that first node and it's going to go out to the internet. Same thing with telephones you have here, the wireless telephone. This is a radio transmitter. This is going to communicate to the closest cellular tower, and that cellular tower is going to either use microwave or hardline, and it's going to go to the internet. So what I mean by convergent dependencies, if the Verizon backbone is being utilized not only for internet data transmission, but is also being utilized for voice data transmission and video data transmission, that's a dependency that probably you're unaware of, and you don't recognize it until that backbone goes down. Now, we see this happen when a lot of cloud service providers, at the scaled cloud service providers like Amazon and Microsoft and IBM and others, when they have a regional outage, you then all of a sudden see, you can illuminate all the dependencies that are inside that space on that one service provider. So, had one where people, recent event, actually it's not recent, about a year and a half, 2 years ago, where US 1 East went down for AWS. And because of that, Amazon, electronic locks, Ring doorbells, and integrated garage systems for garage doors. Again, why your garage door needs to talk to the internet is debatable, but they can. I purposely made it so mine couldn't, but people couldn't get into their homes because a cloud service provider went down. What's that got to do with getting into my house? Convergent dependencies. Again, risk, hard to perceive. So how can we reduce our personal risk? Doing pretty good on time. How are we doing with questions? Any questions, any comments at this point? There it is, thank you. I couldn't remember POTS. That was exactly plain old telephone system. Very good, thank you. Could not remember, it's just one of those senior moments, I guess. Nevertheless, how can we reduce our personal risk? Again, you put on a different risk approach when you get on different types of public transportation, or you're walking around Boston. We're paying attention to what's going on around us. Love this city, love this place. Paying attention when I go outside. It's just the way it is. So I'm not going to go with a boilerplate. Okay, I'm just going to take you through these things, so we won't go through. I think you're pretty familiar with it, but you hear a lot of conversations right now about multi-factor identification. So I'm going to ask a question, because you hear about multi-factor, and you understand what that means, I hope. But it's you're going to have your password to get into your account, but then you're going to get a second question on a different device that you're going to have to verify that you have the authority to be able to access the system. And it's usually going to be whether it's a text message, or better yet, an authentication application, because they're actually more secure than getting a text message. But multi-factor authentication, and again, 99% less likely you will get hacked. Yes, that is what they tell us to say. Yes, there is a specific type of risk associated with multi-factor that, yes, if you use multi-factor, there is a much lower much lower likelihood that that will be exploited against you. So does anybody know what multi-factor is really, really good at doing? What's the one thing, or it's actually a couple things, but what is the best thing that multi-factor prevents? Okay, Laura, there's good thought. There you go. Thank you, Pamela. You're absolutely right. It makes you, it's inconvenient. Yes, it is that. Keep you from clicking on the wrong thing. Yep, piggybacking. Good, Bill. Good. All right, so I continue to go back to the director's office and others inside my organization that you can tell people what to do, but it's much more effective to tell them why they should do it so that they can figure out for themselves to make their own decisions. So what multi-factor authentication is really good at doing is preventing effective password spraying. Now, password spraying is the ability for threat actors to fire passwords at accounts at scale. And we're talking like, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of attempts per second. And they're not going at the login page. They're going at a different segment of the network to be able to do this. But password spraying, multi-factor makes it impossible, because even if they get into the account, what that's going to trigger is another request for authentication that they don't have access to. And what it does reduce 99% of is the patience of the threat actor to continue going at that specific target, because there are other targets that are not using multi-factor, so they'll move on to something else. It's just economics. So it's extremely good at preventing password spraying effectiveness. And unfortunately, I deal with password sprays all the time, and it's a very effective. You could also call it brute forcing into an account. But unfortunately, brute forcing also is very effective for organizations that do not use long passwords. And that's our next point. All right. I have a laptop at home. It is optimized for password cracking. It's my job. Okay. I did penetration testing before, and I certainly know how to do cracking of passwords. It is optimized. It has a graphics card, it's a gaming laptop, and I have a specific type of software on a specific type of operating system that is optimized to break password encryption. On that computer, I can crack a 6-word multi-character password in about 5 hours. This is a laptop. This isn't some grand super cracking machine. A laptop. Gaming laptop, and it's about 5 years old, and consistently 6-character password, all the bells and whistles take about 6 hours. NVIDIA just released a new graphics card. It's called the 4090. Now, believe me, it's very high end, but it's not beyond the reach of consumers. It's expensive, but it's not overly expensive. It's less than, well, I'm not going to go into the price. Never mind. But what I am going to say is that there is a capability to make something called a Hashcat machine. Hashcat. And that is a machine that is specifically optimized for cracking. Some companies use them, types of softwares. There's companies that specialize in this. One company I think was called Kraken, which is actually a crypto firm, or a crypto coin firm. But with this technology and optimized software and building the machine the right way, called a Hashcat machine, 8-character password, all the bells and whistles, 40 seconds. 40 seconds. Current recommended guidance is 11 characters. Now, there are exponentials in password length, and the exponentials hit pretty much with every additional character. So yes, the difference between 5 to 8 characters, or 6 to 8 characters, doesn't sound like a lot. It is exponentially harder. So it would take me years to crack an 8-character password with that laptop, where it only takes this other machine 40 seconds. You bump that up to the recommended 11, and we are talking about decades for a brute force attempt to crack a password. You also recognize it gets harder to remember a longer password. And so that's where we get into password phrases. And there's certainly lots of instructions that are out there for you to be able to learn how to use a passphrase. I use them all the time. But there's also another opportunity for you to look at offloading some of the responsibility you have for password complexity to using a password manager. But there are specific conditions I'm going to recommend password manager to you. But strong passwords, using a password manager, which will come up with whatever length password you want, and it will be utterly and totally random, but you will be reliant on that platform to get access to your accounts. Yes, you can print them out. It kind of defeats the purpose of doing it to print them out, but if you can secure it and you can put it in a safe or something like that, okay, maybe there's an option there. Recognize and report phishing when you see it. We get them all the time. I have a business phone here, and I got a smish, an SMS on Friday telling me that my Netflix account had been suspended. I'm sorry, Netflix doesn't have his telephone number. It's clearly a smish, and it's clearly an attempt. And it's kind of silly, but you know, they're around us all the time. If you see something, report it. And you know, if it's you personally, report it to your phone company. There are ways to do that. You can report phishes to your phone provider, your AT&T and for Verizon. I recommend doing it. And, you know, honestly, I've been doing it for a couple of years now. Eventually they do start to diminish as long as, you know, they're able to do the due diligence and get law enforcement involved. They do take them down. And then lastly, update your software. And I know that's incredibly inconvenient. It's a pain in the butt. Yes, and it's not just software that you use every day. It's also firmware. I'm going to ask you a question. When was the last time you updated the software on your home router? Now, you don't necessarily have to answer that, but I would tell you if you haven't done it, do it. Good for you. Excellent, Roy. In my router, in my system I have at the house, I check about every 10 days. Now they've sort of dropped off. But there was a time where I was getting updates literally every 10 days. But yes, and so Pamela, you raised the point. Yes, there is a firmware update out there for your router that you probably need to go hunt down. And so depending on your router maker, you can go onto their website and they will give you the addresses where you can go. And it will also give you the process to update your firmware. I emphasize this. Remember, we talked about how these services are so important to us. If an actor can get access to your router, and there are specific types of malware that do create a persistent presence on a router, if I can get on the router, I can get on the high ground. That is one of the most effective means to be able to get into a home network, is to gain and maintain control of the router. Because in most cases, the encryption on that side, even if you're using a VPN, is very low. And it's very easy for me to move around inside the environment if the router has been compromised, because it's also a switch. Okay, good point. So if you're actually getting the service from a third party, again, a service from a third party, in most cases, they're going to push you updates, but it doesn't hurt to look to make sure that you have it set to actually be able to accept those updates. And you do, you know, I would recommend going and just getting smart on it if you would. That's my best recommendation to you about it. Okay, so update your software. All right, so common sense from Daniel to you. Alrighty, so make sure we don't have questions. And please feel free to add, you know, we're going to head in some, take some questions after this, but all right, so work with me here. I've said it before, I'll say it again. Convenience is addictive. It is, it's like a narcotic, and I'm not exaggerating this. It literally has a biochemical reaction when you are presented with a convenience function. And you are obviously, you know, very close to the point of saying, you know, oh God, I have to put in another, where's my phone? I got to get in my bank account. It's a pain. And I have talked to people inside of banks who say, we cannot put a single additional requirement on our customers or they'll walk because they're just tired of it. Okay, it's their money. Okay, fine, fair enough. Convenience is addictive. If it that convenient, you have to start asking yourself what I've given up for that convenience. Yes, I want Netflix on all my devices all the time. Okay, how is it doing that? How is it making it possible for me to go from that device to this device and know exactly where I was in that film? Okay, well, it's using my account. Okay. What other information does it know where I am? Does it need to know where I am? There's a bunch of questions that come out of this. So nevertheless, convenience is addictive. It's very hard to have a conversation with people about security when convenience is the principal marketing technique and tactic that's being used on how to move a product. Convenience also sells big time. Risk versus safety. It's the same in cyber. You get in your car, you put on your seatbelt, I would hope. Well, we're in Massachusetts right now, at least I am. Speed limits are debatable. Nevertheless, you know, follow the speed limit. Absolutely. Okay. But risk versus safety. If I'm driving like a bat out of hell, and something happens, that's on me. That's nobody else's fault. It's the same in cyber. Slow down and listen to your gut. Don't say you're being paranoid in this space. My wife has gotten really good at this. My wife has gotten really good at paying attention to the emails and the SMSs she gets and the other messages she gets and being able to spot the fish. And she'll come running and going, oh, I got a fish. Can we take it apart? Can we take it apart? I'm like, okay, wait a minute. We got to figure out what this is. But in some cases, I've had, one case where she came in and she was absolutely convinced it was a fish. And I'm looking at it, I'm like, you need to call the bank. And unfortunately, it was a local bank that really didn't have a very well-established policy on how to tell customers some piece of information. And it looked really slapdash. It looked really sort of hokey, but it was legit. It really was the bank. But that triggered all of her flags. Oh, this is a fish. They're trying to go to my bank account. Actually, they did try to go to her bank account. Her bank was trying to tell her that something had happened. It's just they did it so badly, it looked like a fish. So there's a lesson there as well. If something is too good to be true, I don't need to finish that. It's too good to be true. Okay. It's not true. That's been around for quite a while. Information is a commodity, meaning it has value. There are entire industries built on your information. You need to start treating it like one. I'm serious about this. Your information is valuable. Every time you go to a retail shop and they ask for your email, your question should be, why? I'm buying socks. You don't need my email for me to buy socks. Oh, well, we just want to make sure you're satisfied. I don't care what you think. You don't need my email and you don't need my phone number. You can do that. You can say no. And I recommend it. Love saying yes, like saying no too. Scrutinize your emails and your phone calls. Okay. So this one's going to pop up again with misinformation at the bottom. As I said before, threat actors are going to use every technique they possibly can to motivate you to do something, especially in social engineering. Scrutinizing your emails and your phone calls, if there is an element of urgency to what you're doing, you get an email out of the blue, somebody's got a problem, I've been in a car accident, somebody I love has been in a car accident, I need your help, this is absolutely urgent. You should go into that mode of, okay, public transportation, public network, what's going on? Someone's trying to have a conversation with me on email of someone that I'm not expecting, and there's all of a sudden this urgent case. There is nothing that prevents you from going to a secondary type of communication saying, hey, let's pick this up on the phone and give them a call with information that you have just to validate what they're doing. Scrutinize your emails and your phone calls. Pay attention. This is an open attack surface. You can come in from anywhere. I can spoof telephone numbers. I can spoof emails. I can make an email look exactly like what you're expecting from one of your friends. It's almost impossible to be able to tell what it is until you get to the call to action. I need 10 Apple gift cards to be able to get somebody out of jail. I'm sorry. I'll help you with that. I know people at the FBI. It's silly. Nevertheless, watch it. Use a password manager and VPN. All right, VPN is a virtual private network. If it's an application that you're using for VPN, it is encrypted from your device to the first place you're going on the internet. So everything leaving your device will be encrypted. It's an excellent way for you to protect from sniffing. Now, the company that's providing that VPN, it should be encrypted. They should have inside the contract that there is no way for them to be able to gain access to that account. Take that for a grain of salt. But my takeaway for both password manager and VPN is, if you can do it, I recommend that you use a paid service. So if there's nothing you remember from this entire presentation today and just this one thing, and I'm going to check on chat, there is no such thing as free chicken. I'm going to say it again. There is no such thing as free chicken. It's an old saying. very old. I've gone back. I've tried to find out where it came from, but I actually had one of my senior general officers used to really enjoy saying it, and it stuck, but he's absolutely right. Free is not free, and it never is. Somebody is paying for it. And in most cases, you are. In the terms and conditions, which I all recognize that nobody reads, there are details as to how your information will be monetized. It is much cleaner when you get into a transaction with a company and you're actually paying for the service. It's very clean, and you have the rights that are guaranteed by a transaction in a contract. It's good. I recommend it. I myself use a password manager, yes, but not for every account. There are some accounts, they don't go into the password manager. I'm not going to tell you which ones they are, but trust me, there are some accounts that stay up here, period. But I only have to remember a couple now. And I've got hundreds like you do that are being handled by technology that it's okay. But if my subscription to a newspaper gets compromised, it's not the end of the world. It's okay. I can manage that. Yeah, so Pamela, you're absolutely right. That password managers can get hacked too. Hence the reason why there are some things that I don't put in the password manager. But I'm offloading a lot of my effort into things that I would be, trying to list out somewhere or write it down, which you should never do, but people do it all the time. Post-it note next to, computer, whatever. Again, use the tool for what it's designed to do. And if it gets compromised, you can assess your risk appropriately. Is it the crown jewels? There are some accounts which will never go into a password manager, period. Now, we'll talk about the previous one about ads on social media, about they can hear and talk. But just keep in mind, there is no free chicken. If you get an offer for something on the internet for free, whether it's a game, my mother, she loves internet games, loves them. Mom, did you sign up for that? Oh, it's free. Nevertheless, USB blocker or power brick. I will try to fish it out if I can. If you travel, and there are times where you just need access to power sometimes. That's just the nature of what it is we do in travel. Be very careful about what you plug your device into. All right, so standard power cord. This device here, and I won't necessarily show you the name of it, but it is available. Be careful where you buy it from. You can get it from Amazon, but look at how many ratings there are on it. USB-A being the alpha type of USB, which is usually at one end of your device's charging port, has 4 contacts. 2 are for power, 2 are for data. USB blocker will block 2 of those, the data connections, so that the only thing you're getting is power. The same thing happens with your power brick. If you're traveling, use your power brick. And by all means, don't plug into a USB in a hotel room, ever. I'm sorry. That's just too easy. And yes, I have tools that will allow people to compromise that as well. USB is dangerous because of the first letter in USB, universal. And you can do a lot with universal. And next to last, if it's valuable to you, put the time in and protect it. Sorry, you lock your car. Yes, your car's expensive. So is your bank account. If you put your time into it, if it's valuable to you, protect it. One last comment about misinformation, disinformation, and then I'm going to open up for some questions. And I think there's a couple I need to get back to. Okay, so you're hearing a lot about misinformation, disinformation. It's certainly politically charged, so I'm not going to get into that aspect of it. But I would tell you that for a long time in the military, that information warfare was part of my job description, and I did this kind of stuff. There are a couple of tips I want to give you for misinformation, disinformation. It has gotten very difficult to get trusted information today, especially through the public network, the internet. Yay. Even inside, it's put pressure on traditional information outlets like newspapers and magazines, and makes it very difficult for them to even do their due diligence. And don't get me wrong, it's a business just like anything else. It is very hard to be able to tell what's right, what's not right, what's truthful, what's not truthful. Very difficult. But that's kind of the point. And I've asked this. I taught a course at a local university here, I guess about 2-3 months ago, cybersecurity course. The full 10 weeks, and taught them all sorts of hardware and software and stuff, but I asked a question because a couple of my students actually had young children. And I was curious because I got into this conversation about misinformation, disinformation in this course. And I asked them, do you teach your kids how to swim and how to protect themselves if they fall in the water? Across the board, absolutely. Got to teach kids how to swim. Got to teach, what happens if they, so they don't, if they fall in the water, they can protect themselves. Great. Stranger danger, all these other things about, how kids have to be risk aware, how they have to, be aware of what risks are around them, don't touch the stove, that sort of thing that I certainly remember from when I was a kid. And then I asked them, do you teach your kids how to be able to protect themselves on the internet? And that got a little bit different because I had some students that were very much trying to educate their kids about safety on the internet, and that the kids had very strict rules as to what they could do with their devices. And then I had others that just saying that, well, they're just on TikTok. It's not a big deal. I appreciate that. So let me give you a couple tips in this space. And I'm not telling you how to take care of your kids, but I do think it's important for us to all recognize this. Nobody in our formal education, and see behind me, tons of education, ever took the time to teach me how to be a scrupulous consumer of information. What's my responsibility in terms of looking at information? Now, as I said, I was in this space on the pointy side of things, so I certainly know how this works. But we all have to look at this space very, unfortunately, suspiciously. If you're getting your information from one location, that's probably not going to work out very well. I'm not going to advocate for one platform over the other. I'm not going to advocate for one channel or network over the other. It's not my place to do that, but I would tell you that it is incumbent upon all of us to try to be better informed. That is the best way to try to undermine misinformation and disinformation, is that when we are receiving information from sources that are not necessarily all drawing from the same wellspring. Yeah, headlines sell. That's the name of the game. And if you just go off headlines, you're going to have a specific type of access to information. Here's the real kicker. If you see something that comes in on any channel and you are outraged by it, you need to take a step back. As an information warfare officer, that was absolutely the gold standard. If I could get, no, I'm not going to say this, if the target would become emotionally involved with the information, more than likely you would have very high rate of success in terms of what you're trying to accomplish. It's a weird thing that happens with emotions, especially with regard to information. If it is textual information, it actually has a specific path in which the information will pass through your brain as you start to analyze. If it's visual information, it has a completely different path than where textual information goes in the brain. The textual information that you receive in the brain actually gets measured in terms of a bunch of different rational and analytical processes inside of our brains, where it allows us to look at textual information. We have to translate it into voice, and it does all sorts of stuff into the head. But if you can get into a visual space, which is one of the reasons why most marketing and advertising is almost entirely visual, it bypasses the rational part of the brain. So if you see something that is particularly evocative, or you get something that makes you feel particularly emotionally engaged with the subject, it's absolutely counterintuitive, but my recommendation would be to just tap the brakes and see if you can find the same information somewhere else. Very hard to do this. And it's very difficult because I see it too. I see it on television. Certainly it's campaign season, all sorts of craziness. But when I got these things that are happening on television and I'm looking at these two completely different perceptions of what this new law will do, that's an indication to me that I need to go out and be better informed, and then I'm going to go and do it myself, because I'm not going to listen to what's coming through the other pipe, because it's obviously there's an agenda here that they're trying to get me to do something and I don't know what it is. So I need to go find out for myself. Yes, again, not everybody's like that, but That is the best way for us to counter misinformation, is to be scrupulous in what we are doing and to be responsible and to take care of ourselves in this space. All right. So, Sue Rosa, never heard of a USB blocker? Absolutely. I would recommend it if you travel. If not, just use the power brick that came with your device. A and C are both exploitable. You can buy blockers for C, but again, the power brick that comes with your device, you're using a small amplifier, not amplifier, but this device here is a power brick that came with one of this. This will actually just make it power only because this is going into an electrical outlet. That will also prevent data transfer. But yes, they do have USB-C power blockers that are also out there as well. But the frequency of an open USB-C port is not as common as what you see in hotels, which are usually USB-A. Okay, any other questions?
We have a question from earlier about a router. So if you have a router through Comcast, do they update it, or is it something that we should do ourselves?
Right, Beth, and I think I touched on this earlier. In most cases, the service provider will do automatic updates. However, I would make sure that the device is actually configured to accept those updates. And if not, there may be a process for you to go through to be able to tell when your updates are supposed to be going through. In most cases, most network combined packages for cable and internet do updates at about 3 a.m. in the morning locally, wherever you are. But you may need to go in and check it. So I just recommend that you would check the actual router configuration, make sure you're getting automatic updates. Any other questions?
What's your opinion on Face ID tool on iPhones?
Okay, biometrics. A couple of things. Recommendation from CISA is, and from other government agencies, is that when you travel abroad, you turn off your biometrics. And that's just simply because when you leave the United States, and if you somehow got sideways with other authorities and they wanted access to your devices, all they would need to do is hold the phone up to your face and it would unlock. Recommendation is to disable biometrics on your device based on risk. Kind of the same theme I've had throughout the course of today is try to be more aware of the risk around you. Is it a pain to put in a 6-digit, 9-digit code in your phone? We used to always do it until we got to fingerprint and we got to face, which is much easier. Frankly, there are some devices I still use the codes just because of the nature of the devices that I'm using. I'm sorry, it's a pain, yes, but there is a reason for it. Okay, yes, a FIDO, USB security key for my personal system. Are they still a good option? Okay, Roy, do you have, Roy, I can do this, but I'd also open the floor to you if you want. I'm kind of done with the formal presentation. If you want to try to explain to the audience what a USB key is, or I can do it, it's up to you, but do you want to try to give it a shot? If you can come off mute. I'm sorry, maybe asking too much of you. Okay, if Roy comes off mute, we'll pass it over to him. But what Roy is asking is that you, Roy? You there?
I just saw him come off mute.
Okay, Roy, you there?
Oh, he's got no
microphone.
No microphone.
Okay, yeah, sure, Roy, no problem. I believe you. Nevertheless, okay, USB key, sometimes called a FIDO key. So this is essentially a USB device. Again, U for universal, because you can pretty much do everything with USBs. I've certainly got tools that will do anything. That has hard-coded encryption capabilities associated with it. And when paired with certain software, will make it feasible for you to do multi-factor with a physical device. So multi-factor, when we talk about multi-factor, is usually when you get, or what you call two-factor, but multi-factor is where you get text to your cell phone. That's not the only option. Biometrics, when we were just sort of talking about, face unlock and with, sort of thumb unlock or finger unlock, that's also a form of multi-factor authentication. Roy's talking about a technology that I absolutely recommend for multi-factor for highly authorized accounts like network administrators and others who deal with enterprise level resources that are extremely sensitive in terms of their value to the organization, where they have to be in possession of the physical key to be able to authenticate. Now, they have additional functionalities where actually your fingerprint, the biometric check goes in it. So now we're really talking multi-factor. So you're getting onto the system, you type in your password, it asks for the FIDO key. There are a couple other types of keys out there. You plug in this device, it then queries the device, which actually has encrypted capabilities, extremely hard encrypted keys associated with it to validate your identity. And then you use a biometric check on the actual device to unlock that key. Once you then utilize those three forms of authentication, you are fully authenticated. Now you remove the device, and it can be set that once the device is removed, that the account closes entirely and cannot be reopened. There's a whole bunch of things to it that you can put onto it that makes it very effective. But it is an additional layer of effort. Now, I have some at the house. I've got some for work. I've got some personally. There are some accounts that I have absolutely that require the key to get access to. And it's usually some of those core accounts that I have for myself for personal email stuff. There's some accounts that are absolutely required for me to be like, if I want to change a password, you got to have the key. So if anybody tried to get into that account and change a password for that and they didn't have the key, they could try all day long. It won't let them in. Possession of the physical device is the USB key. Yes, they are very, very secure, at least at the sort of leading edge of where we're going in terms of passwordless access in multi-factor, but it's an additional cost and it's an additional thing to carry. And again, once you carry it, then you're kind of back in that same problem. Someone can take it. And again, we're back in the biometric problem. So there are some risks associated with that as well. Okay, I hope. Go ahead,
Two
please.
more questions in the chat. I know we're getting close, right to 12. So one is, if you use private browsing mode, is it really private? Does that serve as a protective factor so your information isn't tracked or vulnerable?
No, it is not. I would also tell you that one of the best things you can do is actually use a VPN if you're concerned about who can be monitoring your activity. I do it at the house. And yes, it's an additional layer, but frankly, I just from where I've worked, it's something I picked up when I was back at the fort, and I've never stopped doing it. Using a VPN on your phone, yes, it'll make it very difficult for you to use GPS because your VPN could be bouncing through Texas or something. So there may be some things that you're going to have to adjust. But no, private mode on a browser is you should not have an expectation that it's actually not sharing your information. There are some that are pretty good, but there's always some information that's being shared.
For hospitals, what is the greatest risk factor, i.e. employees plugging phones into the USB ports of computers?
Jason, that's a huge one. Yes, that would be absolutely any device that would be plugged into an open USB port. I've actually been on surveys for major public infrastructure, critical infrastructure, where I go around looking for USB ports. I'll be honest with you, I did for Logan Airport, and kudos to Logan, I didn't find any, and I was looking for a good couple hours to try to find an open USB port because I can do all sorts of mayhem with that. So yeah, that's a big risk. Unfortunately, insiders people who have privileged access to environments is also a risk. And unfortunately, this is just what we're going to have to be dealing with. It's just the nature that, people are still the largest attack surface. So to answer your question, the greatest risk factor will be people. Secondarily, I would also say that, authentication or lateral movement inside of enterprise networks is a huge problem. One of the reasons why zero trust is actually where a lot of these environments are going. Now, folks, let me just say one thing before we have to close out. There is a solution to ransomware. If you prevent computers from communicating laterally, where they actually have to go up and come down into an authentication path and come back down, ransomware goes away. Ransomware spreads because of lateral communication across the network. that's fixable. And that kind of is the essence of zero trust, where you're validating trust inside your environment over every transaction. This is a technology that can be overcome, and that you will not hear about ransomware anymore once that happens. But as long as some networks have made the decision to allow lateral communication inside of different segments, ransomware can continue to be a problem. Beth, over to you. I think I got us to time.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Dan. I appreciate it. I think this was great. Everyone was really involved. I think everyone got a lot from it. So again, thanks everyone for joining us. Special thanks to our Region 2 partners that joined us today. Like I said, we did record this. So once we get it recorded and posted to our website, I'll share it we'll share it with everyone that registered. I'll also make sure to share the link directly with Pam, so she can make sure that it gets to any Region 2 partners as well. And again, please reach out if anyone has any questions, but thanks everyone for joining us today.